everybody has some type of hardship in their life. And I personally believe that thing is a part of your purpose. You have all these self-doubt, self-belief issues, this fear, and everybody around me, I love my parents, I love my family, is like, you need to get a job. You need benefits. You need this. You need that. Sometimes fear is just excitement on pause. And the minute you press play, you're like enjoying that roller coaster. When I saw my brain creating judgments on him, I was like, voice mirror.
Welcome back to a brand new episode. Today we have an incredible guest. Her name is Amanda. Oh my God.
Escobedo.
Escobedo.
You're so funny.
The number of
You were
times,
almost there.
right? The number of times we rehearsed this, and then
I
when
know.
we're on camera, I'm like, I cannot even pronounce right now.
It's okay.
Welcome, Amanda. You are an info leadership coach as well as creativity coach. You are the founder of Powerhouse Coaching. And without further ado, could you please share with me and the audience who you are, as well as how did you get into this industry?
Thank you. A little bit about me. Let's see. Well, I'm based in Orange County. I have a background in human resources. So a big part of my journey and the foundation actually comes from human resources. And I ventured into the coaching world. I like to say my life is like a big accident. Like things just kind of stumble in front of me. And initially, I wanted to be a marriage and family therapist. Like that was my goal. And I really wanted to kind of like bring marriages together. I feel very blessed that I have a strong foundation in my family. And the challenge I've always just had growing up is I've never felt very smart, like very good at school. School has always been a challenge. I've been one of those kids where in college, I would be writing all the notes, reading all the books, like studying all the hours, and I'd still get a B and a C. And so my friends were like barely showing up and getting A's. And so the challenge for me of trying to get into, let's say I wanted to get an MFT license was I was like, oh, more school. Just felt very dread. Like I was like, this isn't what I want to do. But within that, I got my toes as a mental health assistant. So that kind of got me into that. We can dive more into that, but I'll just say that ended up having me pivot into the human resources world. And part of what had me pivot into the human resources world was at the time I was working with emotionally disturbed youth that just got a juvenile hall and were in gangs. I had to physically restrain these 18-year-old guys that used to like curse me out and threaten me. And it was a very hard job, but the part that I loved about that job was like the seek to understand conversations. After Johnny flipped the table, after he had a whole restraint session, I would sit with, and Johnny's finally calmed down, I would sit with Johnny and be like, bro, why'd we flip the table today? And there's always an underlining reason. It's like, well, Uncle so-and-so came home from prison and hit his mom. And when in those conversations, I was able to learn he found flipping the table as an opportunity to have one-on-one time with Amanda. And what he really wanted was space to talk about it. But he was not going to raise his hand in a sea full of gang members and be like, can I talk about my feelings? Nor is he connected with that is what's going on in the back of his head. There's just all these emotional outbursts that happens. And so that conversation I would help unpack with Johnny to get him to share that because he didn't know that that's going on. And I would remind him of his goals. Like, where are you trying to go in life? What are you trying to do? And how do we meet the needs that you have today, which is express your feelings and your emotions and what's happening at home and do that in an empowering way that still allows you to be on this journey of graduating. And so it was about how do we meet their needs and then still align with where they're trying to go. And so I share that with a mentor that's like one of the things I liked about that job. And they were like, well, if you like that, you might like human resources. I was like, what's human resources? And then that put me into a whole journey of human resources where the part of human resources that I loved was a lot of like building the high performance teams and cultivating like that high performance environment. And so I've worked at a number of different industries and organizations, private equity, retail, startups, just like an array of different things. And within this one job in particular, I'll just say it was a really hard job and I was banging my head against the wall. And me and a friend used to go on walks and vent. And I was like, I don't know why we're in this hellhole, but I believe it's going to add value to our lives one day. We just can't see it because we're in the middle of it. And I was like, I'm looking forward to learning how this is going to provide to my life. And I was like on my soapbox going off. And she was like, you sound like Tony Robbins. You should be a life coach. And I was like, who's Tony Robbins? What's a life coach? And she just ripped me a number. She was like, you don't know who Tony Robbins is? You don't know what a coach is? And she was like, you need to go do your homework. And she was a huge fan. She's gone to every Tony seminar. She's read every book. And I went home, did my research. And what's crazy is everything I was researching was like, I call it pulling on my truth strings. Like, I was like, this feels like where I'm supposed to be going next. Like the alignment, the pull. I was like, and it's crazy because in that moment, you just feel energized and excited. And it's like, this is the venture that's supposed to be me. And then immediately, I call it the critter brain starts to come in. And the critter brain starts to be like, you can't start over. You can't like get a new career. You can't do this. It starts talking about all the resources you don't have, all the time you don't have. And it starts to fill your brain with all the reasons why this isn't possible. And so this idea just kind of got, I call it incubated, was put on the shelf. And I got another job. And then this other job became very time consuming. And I remember I'm very spiritual. I talk to God a lot. And I remember, at this job was very hard and I was praying. I was like, God, I know and I can feel this direction is the path you want me to go, this coaching path, but I don't know where to start, where to begin, where I find the time. Help me to put me in the path that you want. Be careful what you ask God for. Delivers, but never in a way that you want, because at that time, something called COVID-19 hit, and I was a part of just another statistic that lost my job, and I had all the time in the world. There, just fear just filled me up. And I was in this pivotal position where it was like, do I pursue HR full time? Do I go coach full time? Do I figure out a split of a half and a half? And in this time, I got my own coach and I was looking for clarity. And I remember I was talking to this guy, trying to work on my thoughts, trying to get clarity. And in parallel, I had all these weird bodily symptoms, meaning all of a sudden for a month, I was like nauseous all the time. And like I couldn't drink coffee, like all these different things. And, we, before we logged on, we talked a little bit about throat chakra. I was having at that time this pressure in between my eyebrows, which I had done a bunch of research, which is related to your like third eye, your purpose. And so I'm talking to this guy and I'm like, he's helping me get clarity at the end of it. I was telling him about my bodily symptoms. I was like, do you know anything about chakras? And he was like, sort of, what's your question? And I was like, well, this nausea, this pressure, do you think it can be connected to the lack of clarity that I had? And I said, I'd done this research. I said, the pressure in between my eyebrows could be related to my third eye, which is related to your purpose. And he was like, oh my gosh, Amanda, absolutely. He was like, there's two types of people in the world. There's Spider-Men and then there's gladiators. And he's like, most people in the world are Spider-Men, meaning they don't make their next move until they have a secure web. So most people are not going to quit their job until they have a secure funnel of revenue coming into that foundation, right? Before they take their next step. He's like, gladiators are all in whether they live or they die. And he was like, there's no wrong way of living, but you're in an interesting position that you don't have a job, so you get to choose who you want to be. And I remember when he said that, I just said out loud, I was like, I think I'm a gladiator. And I swear when I said that out loud, the pressure went away, the nausea went away. And in that moment, when I said that out loud, and I hung up the phone and dropped to the floor and started bawling my eyes out because I was like, God, this is not the path I want to be on. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to start. I don't know where to begin. And I just, like, it's interesting, this blend of what I'd call fear and faith just hit me at the exact same time, where now I call it like the intuition, the intuitive intelligence. The signs for me was very clear that I've been asking for clarity. Do I go left? Do I go right? The path was clear that this is your journey to try go coaching full time now. But then that fear just comes in parallel. And in that moment, I remember just having a conversation with fear. And I decided to reframe my relationship with fear, where I was like, okay, I'm going to take you as a sign that every time fear shows up, this is actually a good sign. It means I'm actually dreaming big enough. It means I'm finally in a place of discomfort where I'm stretching out of my comfort zone. And this is where growth and transformation happens. And I actually have to get used to you being next to me. And so instead of being afraid of you, I'm actually going to hold your hand and be friends with you. And we're going to walk through uncertainty together. And so through that, and I just started, and it's hard too, because it's like you have all these self-doubt, self-belief issues, this fear, and everybody around me, I love my parents, I love my family, is like, you need to get a job. You need benefits. You need this, you need that. And nobody understands the vision that you hold in your heart. Nobody understands the desires that I believe God has intentionally placed within my soul. And this is a point of time where it's like, I hear you and I'm choosing faith in this moment. And like the other part too is like, if it doesn't work out, I can always get another job. Like, it's like, but the brain is like, you're going to end up eating hot dogs out of a dumpster. A lot of managing that critter brain. And so I started venturing on the journey of getting my certification, and that was just the beginning. And there's obviously more to my story, but that's, I'll say, the introduction of how I landed where I am now.
That's
Yeah,
incredible. A lot of people are in a dilemma. Should they go after what they believe is their calling or their talent versus having a steady job? And I do think external voices often, it's one of the biggest deciding factor in our lives sometimes because we're fearful. Do you believe everybody has a calling?
absolutely. 100%. It's the foundation of my coaching work. And what I mean by that is, it's interesting. Like, what I have a couple different certifications. One of them is that I really lean on is the Stanford University certification in mindfulness and emotional intelligence. It's this whole creativity in business. And what I find most interesting about this is it's embedded in practicality, but it's also, from my perspective, very spiritual. And what I mean by that is the way they really define creativity. You and I have talked about that flow state. And in order to get you into that flow state, it's a self-discovery journey. Getting into a flow state requires you to know who you are. It requires you to know what your purpose in life is. It requires you to understand your values. It requires you to have clarity and a vision. And part of the coaching world is we really believe that the desires that you have are unique to you. They are distinct to your soul and your personality, right? Like, for example, this is going to sound like a joke, and it's true. Like, I've always wanted to get into a fight. And everyone's like, why? That sounds terrible. I'm like, I don't know. I just want to like test my power. It seems really fun. And now I recently joined jujitsu, and I am like, that is, and there's so many benefits on how jujitsu is such a value add to me and in a mindset in my coaching, in my business. And it's now a place with that desire to want to like fight. I have an energy to express that. There's a community that I feel connected to. And then the actual sport has a value add. And I believe it's about me following that desire. There's so much going back to the fear. The scariest belt, they say, the hardest belt is the white belt. And it's the courage to walk in on day one. Like, it's mostly a men's sport, right? And like, I'm the only female. I don't know what I'm doing. And it is so scary to just show up. And what I love about the community is they recognize how scary and intimidating it can be for anybody to walk in day one, especially if a female, and they really are encouraging and supporting. They're like, just keep showing up. And so, going back to, does everybody have a calling? I absolutely believe everybody has a calling. A little bit of what we talked about too before we logged in is I believe that everybody has something. Everybody has some type of hardship in their life. And I personally believe that thing is a part of your purpose. It's intentionally a part of you. You are going through it because you actually have everything you need to navigate it. And I believe that's the foundation of your story that's going to help connect you to your audience. Who are your people? Because once you can figure out how to navigate that, then you can use that story to go and help others. And I think a big part of our purpose and calling is just really figuring out, like, how do we get to help others? And it's really a self-discovery journey. And part of you have to do the work first to work through that hard.
I agree with that 100%. If you can imagine it, then you're capable of achieving it. And we're not talking about the extremes. I'm not talking about if you can imagine yourself being a Superman, you will actually fly in the sky. I'm talking about in terms of day-to-day life. For example, I would never think of myself as a scientist. I don't want to do research. That's not something I want to do. And I think your interest and your habits throughout your life kind of show you enough signal and sign. I also believe everyone has a talent, but I also think it is incredibly challenging to figure it out.
Yeah, I think everything just depends on who they are and where their season their soul is in. And what do I mean by that? I mentioned spiritual, and what I'll say is I actually believe I have a bunch of contradiction contradicting beliefs when it comes to spirituality. What does that mean? I was raised Christian. I was raised Catholic. I go to Christian churches sometimes. I go to Catholic churches sometimes. Believe in heaven and hell, reincarnation, saints, ghosts, like all the things. I literally believe in all the things. And I share that going back to the seasons and where their soul is. I saw a medium once and this really connected with me. And part of one of the things, it was kind of hilarious when I met with him. He was like, wow, you have like a lot of family here. They've all showed up for you. There's like people here from like generations ago. And we were going through navigating this conversation. And he was like, they're here, Amanda, right now because they believe you have the energy to, and he said one of the underlining themes of our previous generations and our family and our heritage is they're always trying to get their wealth back, is what he says is, and he's like, your family has had a lot of loss. They're the most hardworking, but they've had a lot of loss, whether they've built, they've lost through disease, they've built, they've lost through hurricanes, they've built, they've lost and lost, and they're looking at you, and you have the energy. Like this is your lifetime. He's like, you don't really have any stuff to work through. He was like, you're fine. He's like, other people that come into my sessions, they want to accomplish this or do this. And he's like, unfortunately, the season and the lifetime that they're in, their spirit just needs this space to heal. That's literally the only thing that they're intended to accomplish is healing. And so this is where a little bit of my reincarnation starts to come through. It's just like, what is your season, right? Like, where are you? Maybe it's just this is the lifetime where you have to learn how to forgive because you're just carrying all this resentment up until your deathbed. And I know one of the things, as an example, my dad had mentioned, he saw this moment with his own mom before she passed. Love her to death, have her tattooed hair. She's like many people, we go through stuff and there's a little bit of resentment and bitterness. And there was a different shift of energy on her deathbed before she passed, where there was almost like a sense of peace and release, and I'm letting it all go. And so, if that was the only thing she was intended to accomplish here, and I don't say she's had an impact on my life and other lives, but I just mean like maybe her sole purpose was to work through and figure out how to let go. Right. And so it's just where are you in your season? I feel like for me, I'm very blessed. Like we've talked a bit about your life. I feel like my foundation is so strong. My dad came from a family where he was in a gang, all his brothers were in gangs. He's gone through all this hardship and trauma. He's not only gotten out of the gang, he has a completely different lifestyle, this Orange County lifestyle. He's become this like massage therapist in Newport Beach wearing his fedora hat, and he's married to my powerhouse mom, and my mom has had a great life where her family says, I love you, I love you, I love you. And my mom has helped me educationally. So I feel like my dad has taught me street smarts. My mom has helped me educationally. And both of those powers combined, I haven't had to live through a lot of hard to recognize and connect with hard. And part of this is like, I believe God has given me this foundation because I'm supposed to do something with this foundation. And so now I almost feel like I have this strong sense of pull to help others, almost like a responsibility. I don't believe everybody else has that because there's still some people are just, where are you in your season?
First of all, I need that median's phone number. So I'll
Okay, Orange County,
talk
come down. He's here for sure.
for sure. Oh, so I cannot resonate more.
Mm.
How can people live slightly happier by getting to know who they truly are?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. I'd say the goal isn't happiness because, and what do I mean by that? There's a lot of emotions on the human scale. Like happiness is one, and the goal isn't to feel happy all the time. Like part of the beauty of the human experience, we experience 50% negative emotions and 50% positive emotions. I think the goal is really to try and veer into the more high energy emotions, whatever that can be, and that could sometimes be fear. Like think of as an example, another kind of concept that we have in fear is sometimes fear is just excitement on pause. And the minute you press play, you're like enjoying that roller coaster, right? It's like if I'm going up the roller coaster, like I'm so scared and I'm teetering at the top with the most fear. And if I just press play, I might be on the most exciting ride of my life, right? And so we want to experience all of that. somebody passes in my life, I don't want to be happy. I want to be able to grieve. So I wouldn't say the goal is happiness, but I think for me, the goal is just alignment, alignment for whatever the spirit is here to do, accomplish, be, show up, and learn. And so, and going back to, I don't remember how you framed it, but just I'll reframe it on how I heard it, and you can calibrate me if I heard it wrong. It's just like, what's the first step of getting people onto the self discovery journey of discovering, right? And for me, like two of the pieces is trying to decipher and recognize the difference between what I call your critter brain and what I call that voice of wisdom, that intuitive intelligence. And depending on who I'm working with, if someone's really spiritual, they might call that voice God, the Holy Spirit, or like, I don't know, the an angel. Some people like it's their grandma coming through. Other people, I worked with this founder, and it like we did this whole meditation to connect with his inner voice, and the 007 guy came through. I was like, sure. But you know that what you want to do is learn and recognize the difference of the voices, because the inner voice that's coming through is the one that's constantly trying to guide you. And what I've learned in my coaching program is that voice, we all have it. We're all born with it, and it's actually mistake free. And it's where we get confused as it gets clogged with the noise. I call it the itty bitty shitty committee. The roommates in our head, they start to multiply and they start to consume, and they're so loud because this voice comes in very quiet. It comes in silence. And so trying to cultivate the difference of that voice. And as an example of the difference of voices where they're coming at you at the same time, initially, when I first started practicing coaching, I was taking on anybody. I was like, I will solve any problem. I was working with this group of women that were looking for clarity on whether they should stay in their marriage or leave. And so we were working through a lot of different exercises to help get them clarity. And one of the women got her clarity, and like the voice came in and said very clearly, you've exhausted all your options. It's time for you to take your learnings and move on. And that voice came in clear. And then what also came in was like, you can't get a divorce. What will your family think? You can't start over. What will this do to your kids? You can't, like, what about your neighborhood? What about their school system? So all the brain critter, the itty bitty shitty committee, was coming up and creating all the excuses, stopping and slowing her down. But the clarity was there, right? And so it's about trusting that voice. When I shared with you too, like my voice that came in and said I was a gladiator, it knew the path I was supposed to take, but it's just recognizing the critter is now coming here trying to stop and slow me down. And one of the things I try and teach and practice with people is, we don't want to belittle the critter brain. Like everything is here to serve us. What you want to do is understand their purpose and just be conscious so that you can be the one in power and not your critter brain driving you. So as an example, the brain is wired to keep you alive. And so it's constantly scanning the world looking for danger, but it's interpreting everything as dangerous, right? It's also trying to conserve your energy. And so it's looking at things like that's going to be too hard, that's going to be exhausting. And so, but the other part is we actually have this fuel, this power inside of us that can be tapped into at any time. So it's about just recognizing and say, hey, I appreciate what you're trying to do and how you're trying to protect me, but I have a more empowering way that we're going to do this. Thank you. But you can take the back seat because I'm actually the driver of my life. Yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think the goal, and there's 45 million different ways to do it, is getting used to and aware of the difference between the critter brain versus the voice of wisdom. And you can feel the difference in your nervous system.
Let's talk about bringing your authenticity and creativity into a workspace. I think that we spend so much time at work, whether you are entrepreneur or work for somebody. I've observed people who want to bring more creativity into their workspace, but there is a old way of doing things. Yeah. People tend to have this feeling if they were to go outside the box, maybe it wouldn't be as appreciated.
Yeah.
What's your recommendation for people who do work in an environment that could potentially block their creativity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say the most common thing I see as a blocker is questions. So, powerful questions are a staple to creativity, and powerful open questions. And most people in the workplace, not everybody, but I'd say the high performers ask a lot of questions. And then there's a lot of people that are afraid to ask a question because they're like, well, should I already know this question? They don't want to look dumb. They don't want someone to say that's a dumb question. So even just like the starter is just asking, getting comfortable asking powerful questions. And the key though, too, is knowing the difference between a question that's going to block your creativity, a question that lacks resourcefulness versus a question that cultivates creativity and cultivates collaboration and cultivates that innovation that we might be looking for. So, for example, like innovation and creativity, if you think of like Elon Musk, I know he's a controversial person, but I think he's one of the most innovative people in the world. And the one of the things that really inspires me is his rockets. And a lot of creativity starts with the brick wall of frustration. We are at the brick wall of frustration. So if we think of, for example, we just got cut resources and now the goal hasn't changed, but now you have to figure out how to meet that goal with less headcount, less money, less applications, whatever it is. And so now we're like, shoot, how do we do this? We're coming up against the deadline, the year end goal. We still have to meet our sales, whatever that is. That's where we get creative. That's an example of creativity. On the Elon, and that's an example of brick wall of frustration as well, where creativity is actually born in a brick wall of frustration. On the other side of Elon, his rocket started because he's like, NASA does not know what they're doing. They're so slow. The bureaucracy that's happening. Why is flying to space so expensive? It is not a sustainable process to get to the research, the science, all the possibilities. And he just sat with this question that hit him that was like, what if we reuse the most expensive piece of the rocket? And it's like, whoa, what if we reuse the most expensive part? How could we do that? And that kind of question, nobody's asked it for. It feels like a dumb question. Like, wow. But the way that's an example of creativity. It's open, it's curious, it's inviting new possibilities. It's like, what if? And if we did, what could that look like? Right. And then all these ideas start spewing out. Whereas somebody that's afraid to ask a question like that, that's the disruptive question. It's a very disruptive question. So you have to have, going back to a little bit of the fear, creativity requires courage, a lot of courage. I've been in environments, I've worked in an aerospace environment, bureaucracy up the wazoo. I ask 45 million different questions. They do not like my questions. And I was like, you hired the wrong person because she's not afraid of reputation, of brand. I will ask questions. And I know the difference that these questions are working for the business. They're here to help problem solve. But some people on the other side, and this is just about getting comfortable and grounded with yourself in the journey. Like you mentioned, setting that boundary for yourself. I recognize someone's resistance to my question. Like I'm constantly reflecting if I get discomfort from somebody when I'm asking a question. Was there an opportunity to ask that question differently so it sounded more curious or open? Or is this a them thing where their confidence, their reputation, their project that they accomplished is now being challenged? And it's like, it's hitting their fear base and they're projecting onto me, right? So, for example, I used to get a lot of feedback when I was working in this aerospace company. I had a manager that was like, Amanda, we love that you ask questions, but, and I'm like, okay, what specifically? Give me an example. They could never give me an example. And I remember I had a conversation with this director. I was a manager at the time. That director went to my boss. My boss came to me and was like, so that director you were talking with, she loves that you asked a lot of questions, but she came to me and said, there was something about her questions that just hit her the wrong way. And I was like, okay, so what specifically? And for context, I went to that director because there was a problem we were trying to solve. I couldn't solve it by myself, and part of this was in her scope of work. So I was trying to understand, asking a lot of questions. How did you come to this decision? I need to understand the background on this, how we got here, to understand if there's an opportunity to make it better or if that feels like the best way to make it work. And maybe this is a me where I surrender to where this problem is. She didn't like that I was asking her thought process, felt it like a challenge. And so it's not my problem, it's her problem. And so I was like, if there's real feedback here, I'm happy to take it. But it's a journey. It's not an overnight process to build that courage, to build your wisdom, to build that groundedness in yourself, to be able to decipher. It's taken me years to learn and feel comfortable because now I understand the different characteristics of open versus closed questions. And closed questions, as an example, are accusational, very judgmental, they're very resentful, they bring old baggage here, they're filled with the critter brain, right? They're heavy. and they're fear-based, whereas open questions are very curious. They're very dumbfounded and they're energizing and inspiring.
Sometimes I will like actually have a therapy session before talking to certain people so I can let my anger out,
Yep.
then go
Yep.
into this conversation more calm.
Yeah.
I also feel when we think of a situation, we truly see it from our perspective. You don't see the world how world is, you see the world how you are. How do you now ask question that reduce the friction between two people and you find it to be effective for productive conversation?
Yeah, great question. Exactly like you said, it's a lot of preparation. And what I mean by preparation is getting that critter brain out, right? Because if you are a human experiencing the human experience, so one of the best things you could do is just the power of the pause. Most people are going straight and flying off into talking to that person with that heated state of emotion. And now, when you're in that heated state of emotion, we're not solving problems. We're just defending our stance. And I can't hear you because now my fight or flight is live, right? So the step one is exactly like you did is figuring out a way to regulate yourself, whether that's talking to someone, whether that's listening to music, whether that's like sometimes I'll do this or I'm like, I need to go to the gym before I talk to this person. And like, and I've been in that similar state. And then the other part that I personally love to do, and everyone just needs to figure out their system is if I anticipate a meeting would like I need to go confront somebody about something that is going to be has the ability to be an escalation. What I do with myself is kind of think through what's my ideal outcome? What's the goal of this meeting? So I'm very clear on the outcome I'm trying to achieve. And then I kind of work back from there. In order for me to achieve that, who do I need to be and how do I need to show up? So that might be like, all right, I need to show up very curious. I need to show up very present and mindful. I need to show up as an active listener and I need to show up objective or whatever that is, right? And so I sit on those words and I literally meditate on like who that person is that thinks like that is showing up that way until I literally feel those bodies are embodied in my body, right?
I am so impressed. I never thought of it in such a practical way
Yeah. Yeah.
to be able to channel that version of yourself.
Yeah, because she's a conscious, intentional person. She's not my everyday person, right? So you have to intentionally invite her or him into the room with you. It's an intentional process, right? One of the other things that I do in the middle of the conversation, and let me say, I'm not perfect at this stuff. So, like, sometimes they work really well. It also depends on who's the person on the other side of me. Are they responding to these tools with me? Like, did they hit here's the other thing is some people hit a new trigger inside of you you didn't even know was there. And so it's an unexpected, like, you're like, wow, I didn't know that bruise existed and you just touched it. And so that takes me off center. That takes me out of my power. And so I always, after conversations, reflect and be like, ooh, what did they hit and what do I need to work through? Right. And I'll, like, as an example, one of the things in the previous organization that I share, I didn't realize was such a sensitive topic is when I feel like people are challenging my sense of purpose. They're trying to keep me small in this box. And I feel like I have a sense of purpose that isn't able to be shared. And so when I feel like people are doing that to me, that's a bruise or something there that I didn't realize. Like, you have to let that go, Amanda. Like that is that's assuming intention. There nobody's like, I'm trying to block your purpose, but that's how my critter brain absorbs it. And it's like I have to work through that. And that was a new discovery I learned in this organization because I just felt like they were blocking my purpose in every that was an Amanda thing that I had to work through. In the middle of the conversation, what I have felt that works. So going back to if my goal is to be, what's one of my goals? If one of my goals is like, in order for me to solve this problem, I need to understand their perspective. I need to understand their thinking process. And maybe one of my objectives is like, I'm trying to get buy-in from this team as an example. In order to buy in, I need to understand what's important to them, which means I need to stop pushing why this matters for them. I need to understand why they experience this as a blocker, what they're trying to achieve, and how I can tell this story so it matches that instead of just telling my story and why this matters for me. And so within that, in that seek to understand conversation, that curious mindset, I have a goal, right? And the other part too is I call it it's an active listening tool. And so it's called voice mirroring. And so coaches and therapists use this tool all the time. And it allows us to be very present and it allows us to just listen without projecting judgments on you or ourselves. It allows me to not be distracted and being like, oh, when is this call over? Or I need to like, oh, what am I what am I going to make for lunch? Right? Like what all the distractions in the brain. It allows me to be present. And it also like blocks my own when I talk about the judgments, my critter showing up and reacting. So as an example, I remember I was meeting with this guy. We shared a client. So he was the business coach. I was like, I considered myself like the inner game coach. We were supporting the same team. He called to give me insights on this team because he was already working. And one of the things with this person, whenever they were talking, they're always like gloating about all these clients they have and all the big deal they were. And so my critter brings like eye rolling. Here we go again, right? And in this call, I was like, when I saw my brain creating judgments on him, I was like, voice mirror. And so, voice mirror is basically if you're talking, I'm repeating in my head a half a second behind you, saying exactly the same you're doing. I'm just echoing what you're saying in my head. So, if you're saying the sky is blue, my brain is right behind you saying the sky is blue. And I'm just repeating the words that you're saying. And it allows me to just take in the words and not make meaning of what you're saying because we're meaning making machines. That's what creates the irritation, the judgments, because I'm making meaning of what you're saying. And so just being present, and I just voice mirrored him. I was like, voice mirror. I voice mirrored. He went on his gloat for 20 minutes and I voice mirrored for 20 minutes. And I actually got to a point in the middle and the end of the conversation where there was valuable input that actually had me change my curriculum for what I was building for this team. And I would have missed it if I would have rolled my eyes, written him off, and been like, when is this call done? And I would have multitasked. And so there are powerful things that it's intended to help you pick up the details and pick up what's being said without interrupting and being like, oh, I can relate to that. Let me tell you about the time I went to Europe and I did this thing, right? We're always like on the verge of wanting to relate and interrupt people. And it's just like, shut your mouth, just create the space and just voice mirror. So that's another thing, at least in an emotional state, that also helps me manage that critter. And then the last thing I'll say within a dialogue as well, it's very helpful that we teach is, well, why is my brain blinking? But it's basically like validating what you're hearing. And so basically, there's miscommunication. I don't even know how we communicate as humans because there's what you say, which is the words coming out of your mouth. There's what you intended to say, which could be different than the words coming out of your mouth. And then there's what I heard, which could be different than what you said and what you intended to say. And what I heard is generally based on my upbringing and how I process the world. And so a lot of the time conflict is made because it's just miscommunication. It's understanding of what you said, you intended to say, and how I processed it. And so in the conversation, a lot of time it's just validating what I heard. So if you're saying something like, so what I heard you say was yada, 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 yada. And you're like, I mean, that's not what I said at all. How'd you get that? And I'm like, ah, that's just what my brain did. What did you say? What did you intend to say? And this has helped me in romantic relationships. I've had a guy that was like, how did you get that from that? I was like, I don't know. That's just what my brain told me. What did you say then if that's not what you said? And then that potential fight diffused in the moment because that was not what he said. He said something completely different than what I heard. But the old me would have flown off the handles.
While you were talking about voice mirroring, I started doing that when you're talking, and I find myself to be more engaging. For the last 10 minutes, or maybe five, I find myself just literally whatever you said, I repeated in my mind.
Yeah.
And I do think I became a little more curious.
Yeah. To that point, that's where your inner wisdom will come up with a natural curiosity question, right? So that's where flow state, but that's my goal that's cultivating creativity, flow state. Flow is in the present moment, is not distracted. Flow is our judgments are out of the way. Flow is being extremely present. That's where all of our power lives.
Wow, that's incredible. We have to do another episode about how to get into flow. It's hard for me because I'm always planning for the future or thinking of the past. But that's
Yeah.
going to be a separate episode. We're coming up on time. Amanda, how can people find you and work with you? And I know you have a podcast as well. So please say more, share with us what the podcast is about.
Sure. They can find me a couple different ways. One, I've got a website. So www.empowerhousecoaching, all one word, .co. There's no M. People get confused. No M was already taken. but I was like really attached to Empowerhouse Coaching. So empowerhousecoaching.co. I offer free breakthrough sessions. So if you've never worked with a coach and you just want to try it out and see if it's for you, come in, we have no expectations and we can have a breakthrough within 30 minutes or less, literally. So that's one way. The other thing too is, you touched a little bit on careers. I work with a lot of founders, visionaries, builders. Those are people that maybe already are very clear on what they're trying to build and how they're trying to transform humanity with what problem they're interested in solving. But then there are many other people that are maybe stuck in their careers. They want to have a sense of purpose. They don't know what that is. And so I have a book that they can get on Amazon, and it is Empowered Careers. And it's just a workbook. It's a series of questions that takes you on a self-discovery journey that helps you unlock who you are, what your purpose is, your values, and helps you really get to a closer clarity of creating that purpose to profits or having an impactful income. So that's another piece. And then the last one is I do have, as you mentioned, my own podcast that I used to have another podcast and now I've kind of transformed. And this is Game Changer by Empower House. And the goal with Game Changer, what inspired me in particular is honestly my brick wall of frustrations. I told you creativity is fueled by brick wall frustrations. And what I'm a bit frustrated about in just the world and society today is our culture within the nation and the divide, right? We're supposed to be the United States, but we're more like the divided states with just everything that's happening in politics today. And that's not what it used to be. We used to be a space where we could actually have debates of our different ideas. And now there is social media that has really, like, you're feeding one way of thinking. And so it feels like you mentioned, we're living in our own world, our own perspective. And what I'm trying to do is invite people into their wisdom to help them understand you're getting all this information. How do you stay curious and understand what do you think about this instead of being sucked into a belief system? And part of that as well is I hope with the podcast to help increase the awareness of what are they really frustrated about themselves, whether it's in politics, world issues, and how can we get them to be the problem solvers of the world? How can we turn this passionate problem, this problem they're passionate about, and turn this into something that's a purpose for them that they get to solve for as well? So that's a little bit about game changers. We all have the ability to be a game changer rather than just sulking in problems.
That's incredible. Well, thank you, Amanda. We can't wait to have you back on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here with me today on the Zhen podcast. If this episode resonated with you, make sure you're subscribed and leave a comment with your biggest takeaway. That's how we grow this community and get these conversations in front of more people who need them. And if somebody came to mind while you're listening, please do make sure to send this episode to them. You can also find me on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. All linked below. Until next time, stay sharp, stay intentional, and be good.